Life gets messy. Faith doesn't always feel steady. And sometimes the pain runs so deep, you wonder if God even sees you. If that's you, I see you. I've been there. And this show was created for people like us. We'll share the heartbreak, the flickers of hope, and the God who never walks away. This is Bare Faith, where raw faith and deep pain meet a relentless God. Count what is gone, not what might go wrong or what could fall apart later, but what is already missing from the room. Maybe it's the Sunday morning that used to mean something, and now it just means setting the alarm. Or maybe it's your child who watched you perform in church and they learned that performing is what church is all about. Or maybe it's the friend who asked you a real question about God once, and the answer they received was just rehearsed and full of fluff, so they stopped asking. Welcome to Bare Faith. I'm Dr. Gladys Childs, and we are in week 3 of our series, Going Through the Motions. The first 2 weeks gave us language. We named the disconnect and we traced how it happened. But this week, the question is harder. What did this cost me? Not what it might take, but what has it already cost? What has walked out the back door of our lives while we were busy doing faithfulness? And what did we trade for a calendar full of godly things and a Bible with a well-worn cover and reputation as the person who shows up? This is going to be a gut punch episode today. And guess what? We're not going to fix anything or wrap the cost in a redemptive bow. All we're going to do today is count the wreckage in very specific terms, because grief that gets skipped becomes resentment later. And the cost of just going through the motions is too real to gloss over. So if you've been waiting for someone to give you permission to grieve what this has cost you, this is your week. So let's begin by naming the ache. The cost of going through the motions of faith doesn't show up all at once. It usually shows up in pieces over years, in places we don't always trace back to their source. Sometimes we blame our jobs, or maybe the kids' schedule, or maybe it's the season we're in. And we'll say, hey, we'll get back to ourselves and God once life slows down. But life never does slow down. And at one time there was a version of us before our faith role became so heavy and our hearts went numb. There was a time when we had real conversation with God that was actually a conversation and not a script we performed in front of an internal audience. And then there are the kids, because our children are watching. They've watched us pray over a meal while secretly checking our phones. And they have watched us walk into and out of church with that same tense expression, oftentimes talking about the gossip we heard. And they've learned that faith is a performance for an audience, including God, who's way in the back row. And we didn't teach this intentionally. They learned by observing us for years. And our children become cynical when they figured out we've been cynical for a long time. We've just been better at hiding it. And then there's the cost we can't bring ourselves to look out directly. We've lost ground with God. We've listened to sermon after sermon that never reached our hearts. And we have too many Bible readings we can't remember a single line of because we were just skimming the material instead of listening for Him. And then the prayers that became performances for an internal audience and not addressed to God in any real way. But we stayed in our church seats. We did our homework, we read our Bibles, we gave our time, our effort, our money. And the relationship that was supposed to grow during all of that, it just waned. Because no one told us it was possible to lose ground while still showing up for God. But it is possible. And then there's the layer that hurts the most. Just think of the people that we've served, and they've gotten the version of us that's running on empty. Maybe it's the men in the small group at our house who got our facilitation and not our presence. Or the kids in our ministry who got a competent program and a leader who managed them rather than meeting them where they needed to be met. And then there's the friend who came to us in a crisis and got the listening face we practiced and the answers we had rehearsed and had ready. But they didn't get us. They got a performance. And on some level, they could tell. And there is no version of healing that skips that part, because that is the cost. And I want to tell you why I know. I want to tell you a personal story about an Easter Sunday that I haven't talked about much. It was around year 5 or so of my time as the children's minister at the church where my husband is the pastor. Now, I have to be honest about how I got there, because the path to me being the children's minister matters. I had all the credentials for the role. I had a PhD in Foundations of Education. I had taken every class on every age group in the church. I knew how to use a toilet paper tube test to determine whether a toy was a choking hazard. I knew how to make a VBS robot out of kitchen supplies and fishing line. I had all the skills. Yet there was one small problem. I don't like working with kids. I've never liked working with kids before I took the job. I didn't like working with kids while I was doing the job. And guess what? I still don't like working with kids. But the skills didn't change the wiring. I was good at it in the way some people are good at a thing they were never built to do. And at the beginning, I really was enthusiastic, but it couldn't keep up with the truth of how God built me. And the reason I said yes is probably the reason most of us say yes. The slot was empty, and my husband asked me, and the committee approved me, even though they knew exactly who I was and that kids were not my favorite thing. But the reality is the program needed a person, and guess what? I was the person with the credentials. So I did the job for at least 5 years. 5 years of telling the people I was fine. 5 years of feeling like whatever spirit and spunk I had, it quietly got up and it left. Now picture Easter Sunday. For anyone who's been to church, it is the biggest service of the year, and the children's wing was at maximum capacity. The families we saw every week were packed in alongside the families we only saw twice a year, the Easter and Christmas crowd, who usually only show up because their grandmothers expect it. So there we were in the children's worship area, packed to the gills, and we were doing a worship song, and we were singing and doing all the hand motions. And then one of the kids who only comes for Easter and Christmas stepped on my foot. Now, you're probably thinking, okay, so what's the big deal? A kid steps on your foot. And normally it wouldn't be a big deal, but about a week before this Easter Sunday, I had a problem with my big toenail on that foot. The kind of problem where the doctor looked at me and he said, I have to take the whole toenail off. So my toe was healing, the nail was gone, but I gotta tell you, that area was raw. And somehow I'd still managed to cram my foot into my tennis shoe and go to the Sunday service. But when the kid stepped down on my toe, the pain that went up my leg in a wave and it lodged in the back of my throat, I literally had to bite down on the inside of my lip to keep from making a sound that would have scared every child in the room. And my eyes filled up with tears and the room blurred. And in that moment, with pain just throbbing in my foot and the tears in my eyes, and a room full of kids singing and doing hand motions, a thought I'd kept at bay for years just surfaced. I don't belong here. Now, I didn't mean I don't belong in this room on this morning. I meant I don't belong in this role. And I haven't belonged here for a long time. And showing up and doing the work, it has been costing me something. And I'm not going to get it back. And during all these revelations, the kids kept singing and they kept doing the hand motions. And the child who stepped on my foot, he didn't know. I just finished the service, I cleaned up the room, and I drove home wearing the tennis shoes that were just a bit too small in light of my recent surgery. And it was sometime later, I was in a meeting with the associate pastor at the time, and I was preparing to transition from full-time faculty member to a dean's position at the university where I worked during the week. And as I was eating lunch with the associate pastor and discussing my new role at work, I finally said what my heart had felt for a long time. And I looked at him straight in the eyes and I said, I am a detriment to the Childs program ever moving forward. I don't belong here. And he looked shocked. I don't think he had any idea what to say to the pastor's wife, who was also the children's minister, who had just told him she was bad for the program. But he took care of it, and within a few weeks, I was out. But what I had lost in those 5 years, if I'm honest, it didn't come all back. The wear and tear had done what wear and tear does. Some of my spunk came back over time, but some of it didn't. And going through the motions cost me. And when we come back, we'll look at another person not realizing what going through the motions is costing him.
Exhausted from striving? There's a better way. My book, Chasing Emptiness, Finding Fullness, is available now.
In Scripture, we find another person who is going through the motions, and he's in Luke chapter 15. And most of us know this chapter as the parable of the prodigal son. But Jesus is telling a story with 2 sons. And the second one is the one we need this week. So, a man has 2 sons, and the younger one demands his inheritance early, and he leaves home and he blows all of that money on what the text calls reckless living. And then, with nowhere left to go and no money, he decides to come home. And the father sees him coming from a long way off, and he runs to him and he kisses him, and he kills the fattened calf and throws a party. And that is the part most of us know. But Jesus doesn't stop there. In Luke 15:25, it picks up with the older brother out in the fields doing what he always does. As he comes back toward the house, he hears the music and the dancing, and he calls one of the servants over and asks, "What's happening?" And the servant tells him his brother has come back and his father has killed the fattened calf. And verse 28 says, "But he was angry and refused to go in." Let's stay there for a second. The older brother, the one who'd spent his entire life inside his father's house, he didn't leave, he didn't break the rules, he has been faithful. And the night his father throws a celebration, he stands outside in the dark and refuses to walk in. So his father comes out to him. And here's what the older brother says in Luke chapter 15, verses 29 through 30. "Look, these many years I have served you, and I never disobeyed your command, and yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed a fattened calf for him." Listen to the math underneath that. This many years I have served you. Years plural. A lifetime of staying inside the lines. Yet you never gave me. The accounting is open, and he's been keeping score the entire time. And listen to how he refers to his own brother. Not my brother. He calls him this son of yours. The relationship has thinned to the point where he can't claim the family in his own sentence. Can you imagine that? He's been living in his father's house, but not really with his father, because the system kept running, but the relationships died inside of it. And this is the picture for week 3. It's about the man who stayed and he served. He didn't break the rules. But underneath that perfect record, there was a heart that had been turning into the heart of an employee. And the fuel was duty, and the audience was an internal accounting of what he was owed. And the relationship he was supposedly working for had become a relationship he was working against. Now, the older brother is not Jesus' picture of a wayward person. He's Jesus' picture of a person who never wandered and yet lost the relationship anyway. And somewhere along the way, just like us, he got caught up in the doing, and the focus moved away from being in a relationship and working alongside the Father toward the duties themselves, the responsibilities, the I have to do this, the who else will. And if we look at the Father doesn't interrupt his Son. The Father doesn't call him ungrateful. The Father lets him say all of it. And the grief just comes out of the older brother's mouth without anyone telling him to stop. So for now, we're going to leave the older son standing in that yard with his words hanging in the air. And the Father's response, we're going to talk about that next week. But this week, the focus is on standing and naming. The Father doesn't need our grief edited before he hears it. Just like the older brother's words are in the Bible because they weren't too much. And ours aren't too much either. But the reality is the naming is the hard part. And doing it on purpose this week is the next part. So we will be right back with 3 ways to start.
If Bare Faith is hitting home for you, subscribe so you never miss an episode. New ones drop every Wednesday.
The older brother named what staying had cost him. And here are 3 things we can do this week to do the same. Option 1, count it. Most of the cost we have been carrying has stayed in our heads, and we just have this vague sense of what we lost, and we don't seem to really have words for it. But when we look at the older brother, he had to stand in the yard and just say it. These many years, the goat I never got, the friends I never celebrated with. So this week, sit down with a piece of paper or your phone and count it in specifics. Maybe it's the version of you that walked out and when you noticed. Or that conversation with God you really haven't had for several months. Or maybe it's the Bible study where you said the right thing, but you could feel yourself saying the right thing. Once you have these sentences written out, speak them out loud, even if it's just to the ceiling. Because the cost that stays vague stays that way when it stays inside. Option 2, sit with one. Pick one of the costs you just named, the one that feels the heaviest, the one you almost didn't write down because writing it down made it real. Pick that one. And this week, I'm going to want you to do something totally different. Don't try to fix it. Don't make a plan to recover it. Don't announce it to anyone yet. Just notice when it shows up. The older brother stood in the yard. He didn't run inside to try to start fixing things. He stood and he let the cost be what it was. And that is the work for this week. Option 3, tell one person. One person who knows you, who isn't going to fix you or report you, but one who will hear what these years have cost you and will still stay in the room. And if you can't think of a person, that's also information, because the isolation is part of what the years have cost us. And naming the absence of a person counts as naming a cost. So we have 3 ways to fix it. Count it, stay with one, and tell one person. Pick the one that scared you the most when I said it. And that's probably what you need to focus on this week. And now we have to ask the question, where is Jesus in all this? Now, most weeks we go looking for a scene, and I usually talk about a moment in the Gospels where Jesus steps into someone's pain. But this week, the better answer isn't a scene. It's something Jesus said. In Matthew 15, Jesus is speaking with a group of religious leaders. And guess what the religious leaders are doing? They're arguing with him over the ritual of hand washing. Now, this conversation is going to go somewhere we don't need to go today. But in the middle of it, what is so amazing is that Jesus pulls up a line from the prophet Isaiah and uses it to name something that he sees clearly. In Matthew 15:8, he says, "This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me." Hear that again. This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. That is Jesus' own diagnosis of the exact pattern this episode has been naming. For whatever reason, just like the religious leaders, our lips keep moving while our hearts drift somewhere else. And Jesus saw it, and he had words for it. And the next phrase he uses is even sharper. He says, in vain do they worship me. And when I think about that, and the years of worship for all of us that didn't become formation, or the Bible reading that didn't change us, or the prayers that were really just performances for an internal audience. Jesus has a word for all of it. And hear what that means for where we are sitting tonight. The cost of what we've been counting is not a cost Jesus is just now learning about, just because we decided to sit down and make a list. Jesus has been carrying language for it the whole time. Centuries before our birth, he pulled a line from Isaiah and used it to name what we have been living through today. The honoring with our lips while our heart is going somewhere else. And guess what? He isn't surprised that we are here. And he isn't waiting for us to figure out what is wrong before he can be with us in it. He has known the pattern by name longer than we have been alive. That is who is with us right now. Not a Jesus who looks at our exhausted faith and tries to figure out, oh my gosh, what happened with him this time? It's a Jesus who has been describing what happened the whole time and has just been waiting for us to look up and recognize ourselves in his words. He has been here right now while we're sitting and just counting the cost. He is not figuring it out with us because he already named it. And he is standing here while we name it. The great thing is, we don't have to fix anything for him to be with us in this. The naming is what he has been waiting for. The naming is the doorway. And the work this week is for all of us just to stay in the room with him while we say it out loud. This week is for sitting with the one who already named what it cost us before we ever did. And just let him be in it with us. If today met you where you are, my devotional, Chasing Emptiness, Finding Fullness, was written for people seeking a deep relationship with Christ. 45 days of scripture, reflection, and journal space for those who are tired of performing and are ready to be honest about the cost. You can find it on Amazon, or there's a QR code on your screen right now if you're watching on TV. And next week, we're going to sit with the question, is it too late? And we're going to go back to the older brother who was still in the yard and the father who is still standing there. And what comes out of his mouth next is the answer we've been carrying the question to find. I hope you'll be there. See you next week.